distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon, to this conference on perspectives for sustainable peace and development in the Horn of Africa. Why are we organizing this conference? It's very obvious because we heard very good news from Africa last year that two countries which were enemies for, I think, over 20 years suddenly established peace with each other, and they did it more or less by themselves. So let's give a big hand to Eritrea and Ethiopia and their presidents for actually we started some 10 years ago meetings inspired by Mr. Abdul Qadir Hamdan, who is the representative to the permanent missions here in Vienna at the United Nations, and with Mr. Abdullah Sharif, who is the president of UNCAF here in Vienna. We started to have meetings with the community of all the people living in Austria from the Horn of Africa. And then later we called it Horn of Africa Peace Initiative. A very bold name, and we thought anyway, if you want to have peace, you must give it a clear name. And happily we can say, even it was not our achievement, our dream was fulfilled last year. And it's my great pleasure that also we have a welcome to this conference by representative of the United Nations, the director of the United Nations Information Service, Dr. Martin Nesirky.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, it is indeed a great honor to welcome you to this conference on perspectives for sustainable peace and development in the Horn of Africa. Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words on behalf of the United Nations Information Service, and my special thanks to the permanent mission in Eritrea, the United Nations, and the permanent missions of other Horn of Africa countries for organizing this conference here. 2019 is a very special year for us as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Vienna International Center. The buildings and even the furniture may be have a little bit of a retro feel to them, but I can tell you that the work that goes on here and from here is truly cutting edge and is highly relevant to the theme of your event today. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said our world is undergoing a stress test. Geopolitical divisions, growing inequality, increasing intolerance, and declining trust are among the biggest challenges of our time. Add to this climate change and record numbers of people moving in search of safety and protection. But the Secretary General has also repeatedly said there are signs of hope. After the peace treaty between Eritrea and Ethiopia was signed in July last year, he said the declaration on peace and friendship signed by the leaders of the two countries after 20 years of conflict and stalemate was an example of political courage that is already having a positive effect throughout the region. The Secretary General commended the efforts of the leaders of both countries to achieve sustainable peace and good neighbourly relations. He said that has a very important meaning. in a world where we see, unfortunately, so many conflicts multiplying and lasting seemingly forever. As your conference clearly recognizes, the peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia is also an important cornerstone for sustainable development in the region and beyond. Each country and every individual has a role to play in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and ensuring no one is left behind. Your very presence here today in great numbers underscores your commitment to this endeavour. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much once again for attending this important conference here at the United Nations in Vienna. A conference on how to further enhance sustainable peace and development in such a decisive geostrategic location. The Secretary General has Africa, and it's encouraging to see you also have that wind in your sails today. So I wish you every success with your conference, and thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
But let's give him a big hand for welcoming us to the United States. I want to say a few words about it. It refers normally to 4 countries: Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia and Djibouti. But it's wider in the gate to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Its location on one side of some of the world's major trade, sea lanes and land routes gives it a vital importance. Its importance increases because of the sea traffic going by, major ports in the area, tremendous nearby ridges, weapons trading, crossing points for people, migratory flows, and the center of migratory routes towards Europe, the Gulf countries and the Middle East and Southern Africa. So when we hear all this, we can see how important this location is, and we will hear now some perspectives from Europe and from other perspectives, how the peace and the development in this part of the world. He was long time the defense minister of Austria, and he's permanently somewhere traveling, speaking, and he's really an expert and an observer of developments in international politics, and he serves as the president of the Austrian.
Certainly is not just one conference, but as far as I see it, a very, very important one. And it's also underlined by the presence of it. I think it is important because the awareness in Europe and also in Austria is not adequate to the importance of the regions, not adequate to the importance of the matters, the issues, and the developments. And you can see it, I mean, if you just open any paper. I brought 2 papers with me. The one, it is a very prominent German-speaking paper, a Swiss paper, the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, and it shows a paper, it shows a picture between an African president and President Xi Jinping, and there also was this underlining Europas lähmende Angst vor Afrika, Europe's flaming fear for Africa. And what the article says is that almost everything in Europe at the moment is concentrated just on the migration issue. That, of course, the demographic aspect is highly important. I mean, if you just look to the development, the demographic development of the African continent, this is more than fascinating. When I went to school, Africa had a number of inhabitants that was a little bit more than 1/3 of Europe. 1/3 of Europe. 200 million people around in 1950. At the moment, we are in a completely different situation. Europe has not changed very much. We still have between 600, 700 million people, but Africa has already 1.2 billion people, and insofar has the double size of Europe if you look to the inhabitants. And if you look to the forecast for the coming years, you will see that already until 2050, it might double once again. 2.5 billion people. And at the end of the century, of course, nobody can make a very good forecast, but it is somehow predictable. It probably will be in between 4 billion and 4.5 billion people. And what does it mean? Of course it means that there is a demographic movement, and that we have to be aware of what is coming, and that people maybe also fear that this will be just a big stream of immigrants and so on. But this is only one little aspect, and only one little aspect that is dependent on the development of the continent as it is. And it will be dependent also whether Europe will be able to take the right measures, to take the right steps in order to bring the development into the right direction. What I see is, that at the moment still, not only this region, but also the central developments on the globe are underestimated. I usually, or very often, I show a map where the maritime center of the world in the classical period was the Mediterranean. More or less the whole cultural and economic development, political development went around the Mediterranean. It was already a European, African period, you could say. And then, 500 years ago, this changed. With the beginning of the modern age, with the discovery of America, everything changed, and the Atlantic became the center of the world, the center of development. And in the 21st century, this will change once more, and this will change again. It's not the Atlantic, and it will not be the Pacific that is at the center, but it will be the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is this region from the Red Sea to the Yellow Sea, comprising the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. Just divided sort of a little bit through Southeast Asia. But already now, more than 60% of the whole traffic, the maritime traffic, goes through the Indian Ocean. And 70% of the oil shipments go through the Indian Ocean. And insofar, this region from the Red Sea to the Yellow Sea will be the center of economic and political development. It will be decisive also for the future of ruling, dominance, whatever the systems in the world. And insofar, of course, especially the Horn of Africa will have a decisive function, because this is not only the western end of the Indian Ocean, it is also the entrance between Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, which means between this central region of the future and the European continent. And it is also, as Peter Haider already told us very clearly, a strategic center for energy and many more things. And now we are therefore confronted not only with turbulences in this region, we are more or less used to it. And not just by chance. Because if you have a continent where the increase of the population is as such you know that the population doubles within a few decades. Of course, not even the best governments would be able to provide enough jobs for those people. And insofar, this is not something that you can manage like in some European region or whatever. Of course, this is a challenge, and a challenge that means not only to be a big challenge for the states themselves, but also for the whole world, and especially for the Europeans, because no other continent is linked so clearly and so closely to Africa as the European continent. And insofar, this is our challenge and our task. And what we have to try is not only to look at it and feel some developments. Of course, you always, everything that is new brings turbulences. This is pretty clear. But you also have to look at it from the chances, from the opportunities, from the possibilities you have, from the challenges that bring some goods for yourself. And if I just take the Horn of Africa states, named by Peter Haider, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan. Who is aware that only this area has more than 40% of the area of the whole of Europe, the whole of European continent, and also the inhabitants? Already 200 million people are living over there, in those countries, which means around about 40% of what European Union is. And insofar, we also have to look at it as not only as a market, but as a, let me say, as a place of exchange of ideas, of developments, of what is going on. This region will open the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific for the Europeans. Let's look at this region from this point of view. And then we will be able to influence it. Of course, we also have to contribute. I myself, I had the privilege in the past, when there was this divorce between Sudan and South Sudan, to assist in this process by inviting people, ministers from the north and the south. Mr. Sharif remembers very well. We went to Aden, and we made conferences in Khartoum, and in Addis Ababa, and in Vienna, and anywhere in order to discuss the problems that came up. And of course, nobody can say what was the real contribution, what was decisive. But I'm sure that this was a fruitful contribution to this process of understanding. And when the divorce became peaceful, certainly this was satisfactory for everybody. And now we are in similar situations again. On the one hand, we have this peaceful development between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And this is great. This is the greatest chance for the whole region that I see. And on the other hand, we have a difficult situation in South Sudan still, and also in Sudan. And we will have to try, at least, to assist those countries also in this situation in order to have a good development for the future. Insofar, I have to come to an end. I was too long already. I just wanted to say, let's look at the African continent, not only from the perspective what we can get out of it, but what can this region contribute to the world and also for the Europeans. And I can tell from my own experience, it is a lot, and it will be even more in the future. And if we try to concentrate, and if we try also to do it from the perspective of a small or medium-sized country like Austria, this will mean that it is not just out of a power situation. It is not out of a situation where we try to get any advantage out of this issue, that we get in a dominant position. Nobody will expect this from Austria or similar countries. But what we can do is be a fair moderator, be a fair partner in a process that is important for Europe and for Africa. And insofar, I'm absolutely sure that the Horn of Africa will be an important issue and a very important topic for the coming years. And I ask you to engage in the same way as we will try to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fasslabend. We have some small changes in the program. Our next speaker will be the ambassador of Djibouti in Germany, His Excellency Aden Mohamed Dileita. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you very much for your invitation for this important event. First of all, I want to thank His Excellency Mr. Abdul Qadir Hamdan from the Eritrea Permanent Mission to UN in Vienna, and Mr. Haider for having organized this great initiative. I'm very happy to represent my country, Djibouti, the smallest one in the Horn of Africa, but a country which plays an important role in the region in terms of peace process and piracy fighting. Because of its strategic location on the one of the busiest trade routes in the world, Djibouti had the obligation to serve as a hub for trade and commerce for its partners and neighbors in the region. In order to fulfill our obligation, we have invested tremendously in our infrastructure over the last 10 years. We built 4 new ports and electrified railways together with Ethiopia and the biggest free zone in Africa. We are strongly committed to the development of economic integration in the region and cooperation with our neighboring countries. The goal of sustainable development in the Horn of Africa region is of paramount importance in order to bring prosperity and well-being for its population. Therefore, peace and cooperation between our neighboring countries is a priority that we must all achieve. The population in the different regions in the Horn of Africa share a long common history. They are connected through the same or similar culture and often share the same languages. Many ethnic groups live on 2 sides of one border. There are often families ties which go across borders. For example, people from my own tribe, the Afar, live in 3 countries, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. The second community, Somalians, are living in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. This shows that they are, at the end, we are all one big family. Every positive development which has the potential to ease existing problems and reduce conflict is highly welcome to the people in our countries. Since establishing diplomatic relations with our neighbor Ethiopia, both our countries have profited from an excellent political and economic relationship. Our economic integration and mutual benefit relationship is a really good example for the whole of Africa. As you know, we get 65% of power from Ethiopia, and we organize a pipeline to get drinking water from Ethiopia. From the other side, our port is available for all 95% of the goods import and export going through Djibouti for Ethiopia. Djiboutian national don't need visa to go to Ethiopia. In terms of telecommunication also, as you know, we have 6 sea cables going through Djibouti, and we serve all the neighbors country from Djibouti. Djibouti and Somalia as well profit from a stable and fruitful cooperation. Last week, our president was on an official visit to Mogadishu to reinforce our bilateral cooperation. Looking at the relation with our brother Eritrea, since its independence in 1991, Djibouti had brotherly relation and good partnership with Eritrea. Unfortunately, it degraded on the political plan. But last year, new political developments, which were initiated by the new Prime Minister of Ethiopia, opened up the way to positive discussion. The meeting last September of our two presidents threw new hope for the improvement of our relation. Djibouti welcomed the effort of peace development and cooperation between our two countries, and I truly hope that long-lasting diplomatic relations will flourish, thrive, and prosper. A peaceful environment is the base for economic development. Therefore, I can state that the Republic of Djibouti welcomed the latest discussion for the normalization of the relation between Eritrea and Djibouti. Now that the dialogue has been initiated, we are convinced that change is coming. It is a new beginning for a prosperous cooperation on all levels, such as economic integration and sustainable development in the region. It is a really good time to break the wall. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. I have to say, unfortunately, we couldn't be invited, of course, the ambassador of Ethiopia, who is in Geneva, but unfortunately, he couldn't come because he couldn't somehow organize that he's here in Vienna today. So actually, the biggest credit, we have to say, of this peace process goes to the new Prime Minister, the new young Prime Minister, many people say, of Ethiopia. And so we should never forget, we will see him now also on the pictures with the President of Eritrea. And it is now my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Abdul Qadir Hamdan, who is the representative of the permanent mission of Eritrea to the UN in Vienna. And I have to say, he is a European and African in many ways, because he comes from Eritrea. He was educated in Italian missionary school. Later, he was a freedom fighter. Later, he came to Germany. He worked for German news outlets for many years. And then later, he worked again for his country. He's a German citizen and has an Eritrean diplomatic passport. So he's quite an interesting person. And he will speak now, and he will speak in Arabic, and speaks German and English very well. Bismillah. Challenge us a bit, and we'll show that he's from this continent. He will speak Arabic. So you can use your voice.
أصحاب السعادة.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I am pleased on behalf of the permanent mission of Eritrea at the United Nations in Vienna to welcome all of you and to thank you. We lost the sound, the microphone is off. to welcome you and to thank you for your participation in this conference on perspectives for sustainable peace and development in the Horn of Africa in Vienna, the capital of Austria, which for the 10th year consecutively has been classified the most livable city in the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot forget to begin my statement on this very important occasion. I must not forget mentioning the accelerating positive developments in the Horn of Africa, which is whose importance is derived from its close connection with the Red Sea and is one of the most important strategic regions in the geopolitics of the world. It has enjoyed an axiomatic importance throughout ancient and modern history in maritime transportation, as well as enjoying intrinsic attractions. Ladies and gentlemen, after the peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia was signed on July 8, 2018, in the Eritrean capital Asmara, we need now to highlight its effect and its positive reflection on the region. The current peace efforts over the past 10 months in the Horn of Africa lay the foundation for a new stage of relations between the regional states, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Djibouti. The rapprochement, the clear openness that we have noticed in the recent months between the states of the Horn of Africa, the joint effort to turn a new page beyond the disputes of the past and to work effectively with consensus and in light of full respect for national sovereignty and territorial integrity, abiding by the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of states. All of these indications were a result of the official opening of the land border between Ethiopia and Eritrea after having been closed for 2 decades on the background of the war between these two states between 1998 to 2000. And thus Asmara and Addis Ababa announced the end of one of the longest military confrontations in Africa. Allow me here to point out a very important point that we are all aware of concerning false information that are spread in some Arab regional and international media about the causes of the Ethiopian-Eritrean dispute. This needs correction so that it would not be an obstacle in the path of peace. For example, some say that the border issue was the cause for the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but in fact there has never been a problem concerning borders between the two states, because the question of the Eritrean-Ethiopian borders was legally settled once and for all in 2002, because the decision of the Boundary Commission settled the problem, and the position of Eritrea was clear and well stated on this question. The resolution was clear as well. The Commission sought to convince the brothers in Ethiopia during the previous regime and the international community through the Security Council to work in order to implement the resolution and to demark the borders between the two states. And then the boundary, the Commission carried out a more sophisticated demarcation by placing markings on the border. This digital marking settled everything. If we look at the the African states that have inherited their borders from the age of colonialism, where there are no markings for the borders, yet we find them coexisting together peacefully. Therefore, we never saw a rational justification for a fight between the two brothers over borders between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And there was never a reason for the dispute or a rational justification for war over a border dispute, since these issues can be resolved legally and through legitimate means. And this is what has happened, and we can now say that we have gone beyond that stage and things are back to normal after the signing of the peace agreement in Asmara on July 8th. And this was a historic incident after a state of no war, no peace that continued for 2 decades, during which the two countries lost thousands of victims and hundreds of millions of dollars. We should also mention that this transformation did not emerge out of a vacuum. It came 100 years after the new Ethiopian Prime Minister took force, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, took office on April 2nd, 2018. And in his first statement before the Ethiopian Parliament, he announced the Ethiopian recognition of the peace agreement signed in Algeria between the two countries in 2000, and Ethiopia's acceptance of the decision of the Boundary Commission and the ending of the state of war with Eritrea. This is what we had been calling for, and it is no exaggeration to say that that announcement by Dr. Abiy Ahmed melted the ice and was an indication of the end of one of the most bloody African conflicts over 2 decades. And only a few days passed after the declaration of Dr. Abiy Ahmed when the Eritrean president Asias Afwerki announced that Eritrea will send a high-level delegation to Addis Ababa to discuss the details, and the Eritrean president also responded in kind when he announced over TV that Dr. Ahmed's announcement is an opportunity to fulfill the wish of the two peoples for peace, and that the change that took place in Ethiopia makes that possible. This transformation opened a window of hope over the Horn of Africa, so that it was no longer merely a peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea. It has led to a general improvement in the relations between the states of the region, as was reflected in bilateral meetings between the presidents of Somalia, Eritrea in Mogadishu, the presidents of Djibouti and Eritrea in Jeddah, the presidents of Eritrea and South Sudan in Asmara and Juba, and hopefully we will soon witness a meeting between the presidents of Sudan and Eritrea. This window of hope is very important. This transformation from enmity to amity is a true progress towards peace, which is not a subject of dispute about its importance to the entire region and the continent. The entire continent will not be an exception concerning the effect of this transformation towards peace, and this movement towards peace will enhance the opportunities for cooperation between the Horn of Africa states, and the participation of those states in this meeting is a reaffirmation of their wish for coordination and a better future. This meeting also will be an important step for the participants to exchange ideas and talk about the prospects for peace and development in the region, which is in a crossroads of the world because of its geographic location and political history. So it is one of the areas that are most affected and influenced by political and security tensions, and can turn into a region where international forces and terrorist groups are competing and fighting. So it is our responsibility to form the future and its stability, and to forge a strong political position. And I thank all of you, and I express our determination to proceed along the path of peace, security, and stability based on the principle of common and shared responsibility in order to accelerate the full implementation of the political declaration and plan of action concerning cooperation, and cooperation that will lead to benefits for all the peoples of the region in order to achieve security, peace, and stability in the region. And I thank you for your attention.
Our next speaker is an Austrian. He is Ambassador Dr. Andreas Melan.
Mr. Haider, also permanent representative Hamdan, thank you very much for this invitation, and let me congratulate you that this is an extremely important conference. It comes timely. The issue is on the agenda in Brussels, and we are discussing the developments of the Horn of Africa frequently. I'm afraid I cannot speak for Ethiopia, but I will speak for the European Union, and my contribution is a little bit to tell you what is the status quo of the discussion we have in Brussels when we focus now to the recent developments to the Horn, not because Austria doesn't have one. In contrary, we have a strong presence in the Eastern Africa. We have 2 embassies, 2 development offices. 2 of the countries, Ethiopia and Uganda, are priority countries for us. We have a military attaché, a commercial office. This is for a country like Austria.
Buckhead is not just the ambassador to Austria and the UN. He's also at the moment the head of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which just holds a very big conference at the moment with thousands of guests here in the UN since last Wednesday. So he's very busy, but still he managed to come here. So let's welcome His Excellency Bucket, and he will give us the perspective from the Sudanese side, which is part of the bigger Horn of Africa.
Thank you indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At the outset, allow me to express my deep appreciation addressed to all those who contributed to the organization of this important event, which culminates a series of major efforts made by missions representative of member states of the Horn of Africa, so as to guarantee that this event allows to highlight the importance of this region, rich in ethnicity, cultures, human resources, and major economic riches. This region is a maritime and commercial lane of the utmost importance, both in the past and currently. It is positioned in a very strategic location to the southwest of the Red Sea and the Aden Gulf. It includes Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti. Nevertheless, it encompasses economically and politically speaking other areas, including the Sudan, South Sudan. These countries are partners in terms of being the countries of the Nile upstream, running along the Red Sea. It is a very important region from the perspective of trade and economic integration. It has faced a number of challenges ever since the end of the colonial era, closely linked to the security of the region. This region is going through a major boom in collaboration that has had positive repercussions on the security of the region, owing primarily to the improvement in Eritrea-Ethiopia relations after 2 decades of war. Undoubtedly, it will further have positive repercussions on the peoples of the 2 countries and the larger region. The Sudan deems that security and stability in the neighborhood countries, specifically those of the Horn of Africa, constitute an extension and a furtherance of its own security and stability. It is our firm belief that security and economic integration are closely linked in the Horn of Africa. Therefore, we took the initiative in 2017 to host strategic consultations at the Horn of Africa region under the aegis of the African Union. This witnessed the participation of high-ranking diplomats, experts, and politicians from within the region. And it held a number of meetings on security, peace, stability, cooperation, and development in the Horn of Africa, whereby it called upon African leaders to put in place a strategy that would realize peace, development, stability, and cooperation in the Horn of Africa region. Equally, the Sudanese efforts sponsored negotiations in southern Sudan. It is our belief that stability in that country is of the utmost importance. We are bound to that country with blood ties, social, ethnic, ethnic ties that go well beyond the mere geography of the country and the official government in power. This this has led to the preparation for a revamped peace agreement that bolstered stability and security and welfare in that country. As we turn our eyes towards the future, we need to put in place a plan and a new vision for the region. We, the leaders in this sub-region, the Horn of Africa, need to place the highest priority on peace, security, and this was put effectively into action through the adoption in 2016 of the Silence of Guns plan, a step which complements a comprehensive sustainable development agenda 2063 of the African continent. Equally, we further support economic growth and development through strengthening developmental infrastructure and continuing and maintaining a linkage at the regional level, allowing for a continuity of road, rail and port linkages that extend this region and link it to the outside world. The Horn of Africa is a sub-region abundant in cultures, ethnicities, and history. Therefore, we call for the convening of yet another event that highlights the richness we have to offer. In conclusion, I wish to thank the organizers and specifically my dear colleague and brother, Ambassador Hamdan, Mr. Peter Haider, and Abdullah Al-Sharif for the efforts they've made and that have allowed for this event to take place. Thank you. May the peace of God be upon you.
The final speech will be a message by His Excellency Mahad Ahmed Haji, the Charge d'Affaires, from the permanent mission of Somalia, but he normally works in Brussels, I understand, and because of obligations there, he couldn't come to Vienna in person, but his message will be read by Mr. Matan Jamal, who assists him here in Vienna.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, heads of permanent missions, organizers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am enormously pleased to join this timely conference on perspectives for sustainable peace and development in Horn of Africa. May I commend and thank His Excellency Abdul Qadir Hamdan and President Peter Haider for organizing this important conference that seeks to foster peace in this strategic area in the world affairs. Peace and security remains a top priority of the Somali government. The Horn of Africa is culturally rich and historically complex part of our continent. It is also one of the most troubled parts of the world. The Somali government recognizes that peace and stability are prerequisites for sustainable development in the region. We are fully aware of the complicated link between peace, security, and sustainable development. We are thankful of the African Union peacekeeping troops in Somalia, AMISOM, and others who have done commendable work to bring stability to some parts of Somalia. The protracted period of conflict has no doubt negatively impacted anything that connects Somalia to peace on people's mind, which is rightly so. But the country cannot afford not to think of development and growth just like any other country. Somalia is committed in the relationship with its neighboring countries in IGAD. With the help of African Union and the United Nations, we need to explore further on how to strengthen these relationships to enhance our potential in the field of conflict prevention and reconciliation, maintaining the current peace and consolidating more, as well as reconstructing the country. It is also critical to welcome and commend the effort of our international partners. These partnerships are vital, consolidating peace further as well as strengthening it. We value our partnership with various stakeholders, in particular with the United Nations. The UN's decade of engagement in Somalia has been the pinnacle of peace-seeking efforts in Somalia. Other international partners have also been crucial in our effort to achieve and promote peace and security agenda for Somalia and the entire Horn of Africa region. The Arab League and the Middle East countries, the European Union are committed partners of Somalia, which cannot afford to lose. Finally, I would like to end my statement with peace is important for the people of Somalia and our region, as we have seen by the visits in 2018 by the Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed and also the Eritrean President to Mogadishu to strengthen to strengthen the cooperation. And also this week we have seen a huge delegation of President Omar Ismail Gelle, who has visited Mogadishu to strengthen the partnership. We in Somalia are strengthening governance, national reconciliation meetings, and heightening security cooperation for stability. These efforts have begun to bear fruits with much interest in Somalia again. Excellencies, I take this opportunity to commit that Somalia is ready for suitable and sustainable peace. I thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. In the year 2003, I was in Addis Ababa and is a celebration of the year 2000. Now, my question is the influence that China has in that region. Is somebody ready to put some emphasis on the place of China?
Thank you. I think it's a very relevant question.
Okay. Thank you very much for to all the panelists and the great presentation. And my question is to the Dr. Andreas Werner. And you talk about the regional engagement between countries in Africa. And but I was wondering to know that why in Africa we still have an economic barrier between the country in Central and the West. Do you think that it will not be another problem to a really, open market to the African continent? Thank you.
Thank you.
Over the past 70 years, a rather limited relation to the Horn of Africa. But in 1960, there were 1,700 Austrian refugees, Jewish refugees, who were received by the government of Ethiopia. And in Addis Ababa, the Austrians even had their own Austrian club. And the economic advisor of the emperor was Dr. Pollack from Vienna. What happened with these Austrian refugees?
It's in regards to the renewed peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea. They are doing within the country in terms of addressing the issues that are persisting. We know that these issues were, well, that's at least what we learned.
Okay, it's not an easy question because, of course, you can discuss the engagement of everybody. Generally, I have the personal impression that nobody like China got influence in Africa in the last decade. No other state. And this is not just by chance. China developed very early a strategy. It also included part of Africa, the Horn, Mombasa, into the Silk Road concept. And it engages itself more or less in all parts of the African continent. And this certainly is positive, because there's a lot of investment. I mean, if you go to Africa, almost to any state, and you ask who has constructed this road, who has constructed this airport, or who has constructed, I don't know, this government building, in 80–90% of all the cases, the answer will be China. This is due to Chinese engagement, but also to mistakes the Europeans are doing with development aid. We are by far too bureaucratic in our development aid. We are not direct enough. We are not concentrating on investment if you look to the structure of investments. But you also have to say, on the other hand, that the Chinese investment does not only have good sides. It also has a negative side. The negative side is clearly that some of those investments create dependencies, very strong dependencies, because the investment is big and people or the countries have to overtake debts and pay for that very long time. And it even can happen that they lose their property because they cannot pay back the debts. This is one side. The second one is that the Chinese engagement is very much concentrated on bringing resources from Africa to China. Of course, China has huge productions and needs a lot of resources, and they find it very often in African countries. But their intention to develop African industries is a little low. And also the investment is concentrated very much to more or less take over resources and the ways to resources. So far, one has to be critical, also self-critical. I'm completely sure that Europe must engage itself much more, that we have to try to develop long-term plans for it, and to find pragmatic ways. In many ways, the Europeans act, as I said already, in a by far too much bureaucratic way. They have to concentrate on the development of industries. And this is especially also necessary for the Horn of Africa. If you look to the statistics, import and export of the countries, you can see that there is quite an imbalance. I think I even have the number for example, for Ethiopia. Ethiopia has imports of $16.3 billion and exports only for $3.2 billion. So far, there is quite an imbalance. And the same picture you have in all the other countries of the Horn of Africa. This is a signal that, of course, there is a need to develop industries. And as far as I see it, for example, the new Prime Minister of Ethiopia has more or less opened a plan. Very quickly he said he wants to develop the textile industries of Ethiopia. I think this is right. And this is also in competition to the Chinese, and it's important. Their way cannot be to import everything and just let the others produce and provide your own resources, but to develop your own industries, your own agriculture. And this is something where the partnership between Europe and Africa, and especially the Horn of Africa, can be very fruitful.
Thank you. I think there was a question to Ambassador Melan.
I take first the question of Ambassador Lichem. I'm very sorry, in these 5 years I've never heard about it, and we have quite a good documentation about the Austrian-Ethiopian relations from Rudi Axner, who was ambassador there and published several volumes. I can tell you a lot about the Maria Theresienthaler, but I will have to investigate to see what happened to the Austrian Jewish, to the Austrian Shoah refugee community. There was another question about the integration, economic integration in the Horn. My point from the view of the European Union was that the Horn now, with the rapprochement of all these former disputed countries, is unique. So you have now friendship treaties, you have the possibility to integrate. How should this integration take place? You need a structure. For a structure, you could use an organization. There is IGAD there. All these countries belong to IGAD, but IGAD is only active in the field of conflict prevention, peace building, peacemaking, and so on. Not in the economic. There is no economic integration concept with IGAD, and it will take too much time to develop it. Now, the integration has to take now. So there is the East African community, but the main partners, Ethiopia, Eritrea, also Sudan, are not part of it. You may say there is the new signed Pan-African Free Trade Agreement, but this will also take time until the sufficient number of ratifications is taking place. And it is not so much then that you have...
Ethiopian, after signing the agreement, the two countries. Please, we can respond in your question because the colleague, Mr. Simon, he will address this issue. And that's why, please, now just we have 2 minutes for the first session to close, and we will answer your question in the second session. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, my question was more what's happening internally in Eritrea, not between the border dispute, but since the border dispute is now resolved, what's happening internally in Eritrea?
Yes, he will.
Just to clarify.
He will brief. He will talk about this issue that you are asking. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
5 minutes. Yeah.
Maybe I try to make a short remark. The border question is insofar of highest importance because many of the problems came out of this specific situation, the separation of Eritrea from Ethiopia, and the security situation. A lot of people suffered under the must that they had to serve in military for 20 years and even longer. Of course, this was a consequence out of this constellation, hostile constellation between Ethiopia and Eritrea. If there will be no tension anymore, also the government of Eritrea can change its politics, the military service, and so on. And this certainly will bring advantages and further progress also in humanitarian affairs and in the development question for younger people.
Thank you very much. This closes our first session. Thank you to all the speakers, all the panelists here. I think we got some impression about the hope which was created through the new developments of peace and understanding, and how also we heard about the maybe new view Europe has generally on Africa, but I think also specifically we heard that there's a big chance to relate to this Horn of Africa as such a strategic part of the world.